On the morning of September 14, 1903, a woman walked into the marshal's office in Leadville, Colorado, wearing a man's coat over a torn dress. Her hands were wrapped in what appeared to be strips of canvas. Her boots were caked with mud that had dried in layers, suggesting days of travel. She gave her name as Catherine Marsh, age 28, resident of Denver. She said she had been part of a surveying expedition into the Sawatch Range. She said the others were dead. The marshal, a man named Horace Kern, recorded this in his incident log. He noted that Mrs. Marsh spoke in complete sentences, that she appeared physically coherent despite obvious exhaustion, and that she declined both food and water when initially offered. When he asked what had happened to her companions, she looked at him for several seconds before saying, "I don't wish to speak about it." Kern pressed. He had a duty to press. 4 men had been reported as part of the expedition: Samuel Poole, the lead surveyor, his assistant, Daniel Whitmore, a camp hand named Joseph Cherney, and a guide, Thomas Black Kettle, a Ute man who had worked the mountain passages for nearly 20 years. Mrs. Marsh had accompanied the party as Poole's secretary and draftsman, an unusual arrangement, but not unheard of in those years when the West still permitted certain exceptions to convention. Were they lost in a fall? Kern asked. No. Was there an animal attack? No. Were they taken ill? She paused. Marshal, she said, I won't be saying what happened. I'll tell you where the camp was. You can send men to look. She gave coordinates. She gave landmarks. She described a basin near the tree line, accessible by a ridge trail that branched from the main pass. She said the expedition had been there 9 days before things went wrong. She would not say what went wrong. Kern sent a recovery team the following morning. He asked Mrs. Marsh to accompany them. She refused. He suggested she might be charged with obstruction if she withheld material facts in the deaths of 4 men. She said she understood that, and still she would not go, and still she would not speak. The historian reconstructing this account, myself, has access to Kern's log, to the depositions taken in the weeks that followed, and to 3 letters written by Catherine Marsh in later years. None of them contain an explanation. What they contain instead is a pattern. She would confirm facts of geography, timing, and weather. She would not discuss behavior, conflict, or cause. When pressed, she became silent. When threatened, she remained silent. And when, in 1904, a district attorney in Denver attempted to convene a coroner's inquest to compel her testimony, she told the court, "I will go to jail before I speak of it," and meant it. She did not go to jail. The case was eventually closed. But the silence, her silence, became the only monument the dead men ever received. The recovery team reached the camp on the 3rd day. They found evidence of occupation: tent stakes, a fire pit, scattered provisions, surveying equipment carefully packed into oilcloth bundles. They found blood on the ground near a collapsed canvas shelter. They found 2 bodies. Samuel Poole and Daniel Whitmore were discovered approximately 40 yards from the main camp, lying in a shallow ravine. Both had suffered blunt trauma to the head. Both were partially covered by loose rock and soil, as if someone had attempted a makeshift burial. The other 2 men, Cherney and Black Kettle, were not found. The team searched for 4 more days. They expanded the perimeter. They followed creek beds and scanned ridgelines. They found no trace. When the bodies were returned to Leadville, a doctor named Amos Fitch performed examinations. His report noted that the injuries to Poole and Whitmore were consistent with a fall from height, though the positioning of the bodies, side by side, deliberately arranged, suggested human intervention after death. Fitch also noted abrasions on Poole's neck, as though he had been dragged. Whitmore's wrists bore rope marks. Neither man carried a weapon. Neither showed signs of defensive wounds. The report was inconclusive. Fitch's summary read, "Cause of death, trauma to the skull. Manner of death, undetermined." Mrs. Marsh was shown this report. She read it in silence. When asked if the findings matched her recollection, she said only, "I wasn't there when they died." "But you were in the camp," Kern said. "Yes, you saw something." She folded the report and placed it on the desk between them. "Marshal, you've recovered 2 men. I'm sorry for their families. I can't add to what you've found. Can't or won't." She stood. "I'd like to go home now." In the months following the incident, newspapers across Colorado carried brief notices of the case. The Denver Post referred to it as the Sawatch tragedy and published a woodcut illustration of a mountainside camp beneath a headline that read, "Mystery Deaths in High Country, Survivor Silent." The Rocky Mountain News ran a more sensational piece implying that Mrs. Marsh had been complicit in some crime, though no charges were ever filed. A few smaller papers printed letters from readers speculating on what might have occurred: madness brought on by altitude, claim-jumping violence, or romantic entanglement gone wrong. Catherine Marsh did not respond to any of it. By the winter of 1903, she had returned to Denver and resumed work as a freelance draftsman. She took on commissions from mining companies and city planners, work that required precision but little conversation. Those who knew her in this period described her as competent, reserved, and entirely unwilling to discuss her past. A former client, interviewed years later by a journalist, said, "You could tell she'd been through something, but she didn't invite questions, and after a while you stopped asking. She never married, she never returned to the mountains, and she never, in any documented form, spoke about what happened at the camp." The silence was not passive. It was a choice, maintained across decades, under pressure, under scrutiny, and under the weight of 4 men's deaths. To understand why she chose it, one must first understand who she was before the silence began. Catherine Louise Marsh was born in 1875 in Lawrence, Kansas, the second daughter of a schoolteacher and a bookkeeper. Census records place the family in modest circumstances: a rented house on Massachusetts Street, 2 daughters, no sons. Her father, Edwin Marsh, kept ledgers for a grain wholesaler. Her mother, Abigail, taught primary classes at a church school. The household was stable, educated, and unremarkable. Catherine showed early aptitude for mathematics and drawing. A teacher's note from 1887, preserved in school records, describes her as exceptionally precise in spatial reasoning and capable of rendering architectural plans with professional clarity. She was encouraged to pursue work as a draftsman, a field that occasionally employed women in technical roles, particularly in cities where labor was scarce. She moved to Denver in 1896 at 21 and found work with a civil engineering firm that specialized in municipal water systems. Her employer, a man named Leonard Tate, later testified that she was as skilled as any man on staff and that she worked without complaint, even when assigned to projects other draftsmen refused. She drew sewer lines, flood channels, and railway grades. She did it well. It was through this work that she met Samuel Poole. Samuel Poole was 43 years old in 1903, a professional surveyor with a reputation for meticulous fieldwork. He had spent 15 years mapping mineral claims, railway routes, and territorial boundaries throughout Colorado and Wyoming. He was methodical, respected, and successful enough to employ assistants. Daniel Whitmore, his junior partner, had worked with him for 6 years. They shared an office in downtown Denver and took contracts from mining syndicates, railroad companies, and the occasional private landowner seeking exact property lines. Poole hired Catherine Marsh in the spring of 1902 to assist with drafting survey maps from field notes. She worked for him on 3 separate commissions over the next year, always in the office, always converting raw data into finished documents. Colleagues described their working relationship as professional, cordial, and free of impropriety. Poole was married, though his wife lived in St. Louis and rarely visited, and Mrs. Marsh maintained strict boundaries. But in July 1903, Poole proposed something different. He had secured a contract to survey a stretch of high country in the Sawatch Range, territory that might contain viable mineral deposits for a Chicago-based investment group. The work required extended field work, perhaps 3 weeks, and he wanted someone who could draft maps on site, reducing the need for later interpretation. He asked Mrs. Marsh if she would accompany the expedition. He offered double her usual rate. She accepted. There is a letter, written by Catherine Marsh to her sister in Lawrence, dated August 2nd, 1903, approximately 3 weeks before the expedition departed. It is one of the few personal documents she left behind. In it, she writes, "I leave for the mountains on the 22nd. Mr. Poole assures me the work will be straightforward, though the altitude may prove challenging. I have purchased suitable boots and a canvas coat. He has also hired a reliable guide and a capable camp hand, so I do not anticipate difficulties. The pay is excellent, and I will return by mid-September. Please write to the Denver address. I will collect letters when I return." The tone is practical. There is no apprehension, no hesitation. She was going into the wilderness with 4 men she did not know well, to a place with no roads, no towns, and no help within 20 miles. And she treated it as a job. The other men in the party are more difficult to reconstruct. Daniel Whitmore, 29, had worked as Poole's assistant since 1897. He was described in a memorial notice as diligent and good-natured, though little else is known. He had no surviving family, no close friends who left testimony. His presence in the historical record is almost entirely defined by his association with Poole. Joseph Cherney, 36, was a Czech immigrant who had worked as a camp hand and laborer throughout the mining districts. He spoke limited English and left no personal papers. His role in the expedition was to manage supplies, maintain equipment, and assist with heavy labor. A man who worked alongside him on a previous job described him as strong, quiet, kept to himself. Thomas Black Kettle is the most enigmatic. He was identified as Ute, though which band is unclear. He had worked as a guide for surveyors and hunters since at least 1890, and multiple sources describe him as highly skilled in mountain navigation. But there are no photographs, no detailed descriptions, and no record of his life outside the context of his work. After the expedition, his name appears in no further documents. He vanished, not only from the camp, but from history. These were the people Catherine Marsh traveled with. The expedition left Denver on August 22, 1903, traveling by rail to Buena Vista, then by wagon to the trailhead near the western slope of Mount Princeton. From there, they proceeded on foot and horseback into the high country, following a route mapped out by Black Kettle. The journey took 4 days. They reached the survey site on August 26th and established a base camp at an elevation of approximately 11,200 feet, in a basin sheltered by spruce and ringed by granite ridges. Marshal Kern's later interviews with Mrs. Marsh established the basic facts. The weather was clear for the first week. The work proceeded on schedule. Poole and Whitmore conducted measurements while Mrs. Marsh drafted preliminary maps. Cherney maintained the camp. Black Kettle scouted ahead to identify landmarks and water sources. Everyone performed their role. "Was there any conflict?" Kern asked. "No," she said. "Did anyone seem troubled or unwell?" "No." "Did you feel unsafe at any point during that first week?" She hesitated before answering. "No." It was the hesitation that mattered. A second letter, written by Catherine Marsh on August 30th, but never mailed, found later among her personal effects, contains the only glimpse into her subjective experience of the camp. It is addressed to no one, or perhaps to herself. It reads, "The nights are colder than I expected. I sleep poorly. The men are courteous enough, though Mr. Cherney watches me in a way I do not like. I have mentioned this to no one. Mr. Black Kettle is the only one who seems comfortable here. He moves through these mountains as if they are a known room. I wonder what he thinks of us." She did not send this letter. She did not finish it. The page ends mid-thought. By all accounts, the camp functioned as it was meant to for 9 days. Supplies were adequate. The weather held. The work progressed. And then, on September 4th, 1903, something happened that caused 4 men to die and 1 woman to refuse to speak. The last confirmed sighting of the full party together was on the evening of September 3rd, when a pair of prospectors camped 2 miles east reported seeing a fire in the basin. They did not approach. They did not hear anything unusual. The fire burned through the night, and by morning it was gone. Catherine Marsh left the camp sometime in the early hours of September 4th. She walked out alone. She walked for 10 days, and when she returned, she brought nothing with her but silence. The recovery team's report includes a detailed inventory of the camp as it was found on September 17, 1903. The list is precise, methodical, and forensic in its attention to absence. Present at the site, 3 canvas tents, 1 collapsed. A stone-ringed fire pit containing cold ash and partially burned wood. A cooking tripod with a cast-iron pot still hanging from the crossbar. 2 tin plates, 4 tin cups. A surveying theodolite in its case. A wooden crate containing tinned meat, hardtack, coffee, and dried apples. Rope, coiled and neatly stored. An axe embedded in a stump. A leather satchel containing Catherine Marsh's drafting tools. Pencils, a compass, rolled maps, a notebook with entries dated through September 3rd. Not present any rifles or sidearms, though Poole's contract specified that the expedition carried 2 firearms for protection. Mrs. Marsh's bedroll and personal pack, a water canteen, the horses. Not present any written record of conflict, injury, or distress. Not present Joseph Cherney and Thomas Black Kettle. The camp had not been ransacked. It had been used and then abandoned. The food supplies were sufficient for another week. The equipment was intact. Whatever caused the expedition to end did not destroy its infrastructure. It simply stopped the people. Marshal Kern, reviewing the inventory, noted in his log, "Site gives no indication of precipitating cause. No evidence of struggle within camp perimeter. Blood found outside primary shelter suggests injury occurred elsewhere. Bodies moved post-mortem. Questions remain regarding missing men, missing firearms, and missing horses." And then, underlined, "Survivor refuses all clarification." Catherine Marsh was interviewed 6 times in the weeks following her return. The transcripts, preserved in the Lake County Courthouse records, reveal a woman who answered every factual question and evaded every interpretive one. Interview, September 15, 1903. Kern: "When did you last see all 5 members of the expedition together?" Marsh: "The evening of September 3rd. Kern: "Describe that evening." Marsh: "We ate supper. Mr. Poole reviewed the next day's survey route. I worked on a map until dark. Everyone retired to their tents." Kern: "What happened on the morning of September 4th? Marsh: "I left the camp." Kern: "Why?" Marsh: "I had reason to leave." Kern: "What reason?" No response recorded. Kern: "Were you in danger?" Marsh: "I chose to leave." Kern: "Were the others alive when you left?" Long pause. Marsh: "I don't wish to answer that." Interview, September 20th, 1903. Kern: "The bodies of Mr. Poole and Mr. Whitmore were found in a ravine. Do you know how they came to be there?" Marsh: "No." Kern: "Did you see them fall?" Marsh: "No." Kern: "Did you see anyone harm them?" Marsh: "I saw nothing of their deaths." Kern: "But you knew they were dead." Marsh: "I knew I was leaving the camp alone." Kern: "Where were Mr. Cherney and Mr. Blackkettle when you left?" Marsh: "I don't know." Kern: "You must have some knowledge of their whereabouts." Marsh: "I don't know where they went." Kern: "Did they leave before you or after?" No response. Interview, September 27th, 1903. Kern: "Mrs. Marsh, I am trying to close this matter with dignity for the deceased. You are the only person who can tell us what happened." Marsh: "I understand." Kern: "Then why won't you?" Marsh: "Because speaking would not bring dignity." Kern: "To whom?" No response. The pattern is consistent. She would confirm her presence, her departure, and basic chronology. She would not speculate, she would not interpret, and crucially, she would not name any precipitating action or actor. When asked directly whether someone had committed an act of violence, she gave no answer. When asked whether she feared for her life, she gave no answer. When asked whether she witnessed something that compelled her silence, she gave no answer. Kern, in his final report to the county prosecutor, wrote, "I believe Mrs. Marsh knows the cause of death and the location of the missing men. I believe she withholds this information deliberately. I do not believe she is lying. I believe she is choosing not to speak. The distinction is meaningful, but it offers us no resolution. One of the men on the recovery team, a tracker named Samuel Ortiz, provided a separate testimony that did not appear in the official report, but was preserved in a letter to a friend. Ortiz had been hired for his skill in reading terrain and interpreting physical evidence. He was Hispano, a descendant of settlers who had worked the San Luis Valley for generations, and he understood mountains in a way most Anglo men did not. Ortiz wrote, "I walked the site 3 times. I found tracks leading out in 2 directions. One set, small boots, led east and down toward Leadville. That was her. Another set, 2 men, heavier, led west and up into rougher country. They took the horses. The tracks were at least a week old when we found them, but I could see they moved fast. Not running, but not resting either, like men who knew where they were going. I told the marshal this. He asked if I thought the woman had been chased. I told him no. The tracks didn't show pursuit. They showed separation. I also told him I found something strange. A place, maybe 100 yards from the main camp, where the ground had been disturbed. Shallow digging, then covered over. Stones piled on top. Not natural. I told the marshal it looked like someone tried to bury something, then thought better of it. We dug there. Found nothing, but the ground had been opened. I asked Mrs. Marsh about it later, at the marshal's request. I described the place. She looked at me, and I swear she knew exactly what I was talking about. But she said, "I can't speak to that. That's all, I can't speak to that." Ortiz concluded the letter with a line that has stayed with me since I first read it. I think she was protecting someone, or protecting us from knowing. There is a photograph taken in 1901 that shows the surveying office in Denver where Samuel Poole and Daniel Whitmore worked. It is a formal group portrait, 6 men and 1 woman standing in front of a brick building. Poole is in the center, hands clasped in front of him, expression serious. Whitmore stands to his left, younger, smiling slightly. Catherine Marsh is on the far right, wearing a long dark skirt and a white blouse, her hair pinned up. She is not smiling. She looks directly at the camera. I have studied this photograph for hours. I have tried to see in her face some premonition, some indication of what was coming. There is nothing. She is 26 years old. She is employed. She is alive in a world where all of these men are still alive. She does not yet know what she will refuse to say. The last confirmed moment the expedition was intact, the moment before whatever happened, was the evening of September 3rd, 1903. Mrs. Marsh confirmed this in every interview. They ate together. They spoke of the next day's work. They went to their tents. And then, in the span of hours that followed, everything collapsed. She left the camp alone. She walked for 10 days with limited supplies. She crossed 15 miles of high-altitude wilderness, descended through forests and scree fields, and arrived in Leadville with rope burns on her hands and a refusal in her throat. What happened in those hours between sunset on September 3rd and dawn on September 4th is the gap that defines the case. It is the space where 4 men's lives ended and 1 woman's silence began. And it is the space she guarded with absolute discipline for the rest of her life. In 1911, a journalist from the Rocky Mountain News tracked her down and requested an interview. She declined. He persisted. She wrote him a single sentence in reply, "I have nothing to add to what I did not say." The double negative is intentional. She did not fail to speak. She chose not to, and that choice, I believe, was the only power she had left. The legal pressure began in earnest in October 1903, when the families of Samuel Poole and Daniel Whitmore demanded a formal inquest. Poole's wife, residing in St. Louis, retained a lawyer and filed a petition with the district attorney in Denver, arguing that Mrs. Marsh's refusal to testify obstructed justice and dishonored the dead. Whitmore's mother, an elderly woman living in Ohio, wrote a letter to the governor of Colorado asking for state intervention. The district attorney, a man named Gerald Stowe, reviewed the case and determined there was sufficient cause to compel testimony. He issued a subpoena for Catherine Marsh to appear before a coroner's jury in December 1903. She complied with the subpoena. She appeared in court, and when asked to describe the events of September 4th, she said, "I respectfully decline to answer." Stowe warned her that refusal to testify could result in contempt charges. She said she understood. He asked again. She declined again. He threatened her with jail. She said, "Then I will go to jail." The judge presiding over the inquest, a man named William Hollister, was reportedly frustrated, but also, according to one courtroom observer, strangely sympathetic. He asked Mrs. Marsh if there was any circumstance under which she would provide testimony. "No, Your Honor," she said, "even if it would exonerate you of suspicion." "I am not concerned with suspicion." "Then what are you concerned with?" She paused. "With keeping silent." Judge Hollister did not hold her in contempt. Instead, he dismissed the inquest for lack of evidence. In his written opinion, he noted, "While this court finds the witness's refusal to testify unusual and regrettable, there is no basis under law to compel speech when no crime has been definitively established. The deaths of Samuel Poole and Daniel Whitmore remain unexplained, but unexplained is not unlawful. The witness is free to go." The decision was controversial. Newspapers called it a failure of justice. Poole's wife issued a public statement accusing Mrs. Marsh of cowardice and worse, but the case was closed. Catherine Marsh walked out of the courthouse and returned to her rented room in Denver. She resumed work. She resumed her life. And she never spoke. Over the next 20 years, there were periodic attempts to extract her story. In 1907, a writer for Harper's Magazine approached her with an offer to publish her account, promising anonymity and a substantial fee. She declined. In 1912, a private investigator hired by Poole's family contacted her, claiming he had new evidence that might clarify the events. She refused to meet with him. In 1918, a professor of anthropology at the University of Colorado, researching disappearances in the Rocky Mountains, wrote to her requesting an interview. She did not reply. Each refusal reinforced the pattern. She was not hiding, she was not evading. She was simply maintaining a boundary she had drawn in 1903 and would not cross. Those who knew her in Denver during these years, landlords, employers, neighbors, described her as polite, solitary, and competent. She paid her rent on time. She attended no social gatherings. She did not discuss her past. A woman who lived in the same boarding house from 1910 to 1915 recalled, "She was the kind of person you'd see in the hallway and nod to, but you'd never think to ask her to tea. Not because she was rude, she just wasn't available." Another acquaintance, a draftsman who worked in the same office, said, "She was very good at her job, but you got the sense she was always working to stay occupied. Like if she stopped, something would catch up with her." In 1914, Catherine Marsh moved to a smaller town, Salida, Colorado, about 80 miles south of Leadville. It was a quieter place, less connected to the mining industry, and further from the site of the expedition. She rented a small house and continued working as a freelance draftsman, taking occasional commissions by mail. She lived alone. There is a census record from 1920 that lists her as a 45-year-old single woman. Occupation, draftsman, residing at 212 E Street. The census taker noted in the margin, "Polite but brief." She remained in Salida until her death in 1931. She was 56 years old. The cause of death was listed as pneumonia, though a local doctor later mentioned in a letter that she had been in declining health for months and had refused most medical treatment. She died in her home, attended only by a neighbor who had found her unresponsive. Her estate was minimal. A few pieces of furniture, a small savings account, and a trunk containing drafting tools, personal letters, and a notebook. The notebook was turned over to the county clerk as part of probate. It contained drafts of letters, expense records, and a single entry dated September 1925, written in pencil. "I have lived 22 years since the mountains. I will not live long enough to outlive them. But I have kept what I promised to keep, and I will take it with me. If anyone asks why I said nothing, tell them silence was the only kindness I had left to give. That is the closest she ever came to an explanation. The families of the dead men never received closure. Poole's wife remarried in 1908 and moved to California. Whitmore's mother died in 1910, still seeking answers. Joseph Cherney had no known family in the United States. No one claimed his name or demanded investigation. Thomas Black Kettle disappeared not only from the mountains but from all records, leaving behind no relatives, no descendants, no one to ask where he had gone. The case became a footnote in Colorado history, a minor mystery, occasionally cited in collections of unsolved disappearances, but never extensively investigated. The passage of time eroded public interest. The people involved died. The newspapers moved on, but the silence remained. It outlived the people it protected. It outlived the scrutiny. It became its own answer. In 1929, 2 years before her death, Catherine Marsh received a letter from a man named Robert Hensley, a graduate student in history at the University of Denver. Hensley was researching early surveying expeditions in Colorado and had come across the 1903 incident in archived court records. He wrote to Mrs. Marsh politely, explaining his work, and asked if she would be willing to share her perspective, even briefly, for the sake of historical accuracy. She replied. Her letter, preserved in Hensley's papers, is short. Mr. Hensley, I appreciate your interest in historical accuracy, but I have nothing to contribute to your work. What happened in 1903 is not a matter of history. It is a matter of conscience. I wish you well in your research. Yours, C. Marsh. Hensley wrote back, asking what she meant by conscience. She did not reply. He later noted, in a footnote to an unpublished manuscript, I believe Mrs. Marsh's refusal to speak was not an act of concealment, but an act of mercy. To whom I cannot say. There were theories, of course. There are always theories when facts are absent. Some believed Mrs. Marsh had witnessed a murder and feared retaliation. Others suggested she had been complicit in a crime and protected herself through silence. A few speculated that madness, altitude sickness, exposure, psychological collapse had overtaken the group, and that she alone retained sanity but could not bear to describe what she had seen. One theory, popular in sensationalist accounts, proposed that Cherney and Black Kettle had killed Poole and Whitmore over a claim dispute, and that Mrs. Marsh had escaped before they could silence her. Another suggested a romantic entanglement turned violent. Still another posited that Black Kettle, resentful of Anglo encroachment, had enacted revenge, and that Mrs. Marsh, sympathetic or terrified, chose not to implicate him. None of these theories are supported by evidence. All of them are supported by the vacuum her silence created. Marshal Kern, in his later years, was occasionally asked about the case. He retired in 1912 and moved to Grand Junction, where he died in 1920. A nephew interviewed in 1948 recalled that Kern spoke of the incident only once, over dinner, late in life. He said he'd seen a lot of things in his time as marshal, but the woman who wouldn't talk, she stayed with him. He said she wasn't protecting herself. He said she was protecting someone's memory, or maybe protecting people from the truth. He said, some things, if you say them out loud, they become real in a way they weren't before. Maybe she knew that. I have spent 3 years researching this case. I have read every document that survives. I have visited the site, what remains of it, where the camp once stood. The forest has reclaimed it. There are no markers, no cairns, no indication that 5 people were ever there, that 4 of them died, that 1 of them walked away and refused to explain. I went there in the summer of 2023, 120 years after Catherine Marsh left that place. The basin is still beautiful. The air is still thin. The silence is absolute. I stood where the camp would have been and tried to imagine what she saw, what she heard, what made her walk away. I tried to construct a scenario that would justify her refusal. Perhaps Cherney attacked the others and fled, and she feared implicating Black Kettle by association. Perhaps Black Kettle, acting in self-defense or desperation, killed Poole and Whitmore, and she chose to let him vanish rather than see him hanged. Perhaps something occurred that she believed, rightly or wrongly, would dishonor the dead if spoken aloud. But these are only guesses. They are the stories I tell because I cannot bear the absence of one. The truth is this: Catherine Marsh chose silence, and silence is not a void. It is a presence. It is an act. And in her case it was sustained across 28 years of life, under legal threat, social pressure, and the weight of 4 deaths. She was not a coward. She was not a liar. She was a woman who decided that some things should not be said, even when saying them might have freed her from suspicion, even when saying them might have brought clarity to grieving families, even when saying them might have secured her place in history as a witness rather than an enigma. She chose to be the enigma. In the years since I began this research, I have found no smoking gun, no hidden confession, no deathbed revelation. There is no letter waiting to be discovered that will unlock the mystery. If such a document existed, it would have surfaced by now. The silence was intentional. The silence was complete. And yet, the silence tells us something. It tells us that Catherine Marsh valued something more than her own reputation. It tells us that she believed speaking would cause harm, perhaps to the living, perhaps to the dead, perhaps to some principle she could not articulate but refused to betray. It tells us that she was willing to be misunderstood, to be suspected, to be judged, rather than say what she knew. That is not evasion. That is discipline. There is a moment in the transcripts, easy to miss, that I return to often. It occurs during the 3rd interview, on September 22nd, 1903. Kern is pressing her about the missing men, asking if she believes they are still alive. "Do you think Mr. Cherney and Mr. Black Kettle survived?" he asks. She is quiet for a long time. Then she says, "I hope they did. But you don't know." "No," she says, "I don't know." "If they did survive and they never came forward, doesn't that suggest guilt?" She looks at him. "Or it suggests they had reasons to stay gone." "What reasons?" "Reasons that aren't mine to say." It is the closest she ever came to implying motive, to suggesting that the silence extended beyond herself. If Cherney and Black Kettle did survive, and there is no evidence they did, then they too chose to disappear. They too chose not to return, and Mrs. Marsh, by refusing to speak, protected that choice. Or perhaps she protected something else entirely. The historian's task is to reconstruct the past from fragments. We take documents, testimonies, physical evidence, and we build a narrative. We fill in gaps with informed speculation. We weigh probabilities. We offer conclusions. But there are cases where the fragments do not cohere, where the gaps are not accidental, but deliberate, where the absence of information is itself the most significant piece of evidence we have. This is one of those cases. Catherine Marsh left us no answers. She left us only the fact of her refusal, sustained and absolute. And in that refusal, I believe, is the answer. Not to what happened, but to who she was. She was a woman who decided that some truths do not belong in the record, that some truths, once spoken, cannot be unspoken, that silence can be an act of protection, even when it costs you everything. I think about her often. I think about what it must have been like to walk out of those mountains alone, to know what she knew, and to decide that she would carry it alone for the rest of her life. I think about the weight of that. I think about the strength it required, and I think about the fact that she succeeded. No one broke her. No legal threat, no social censure, no journalistic inquiry ever extracted from her what she chose to keep. She drew a line and held it, and when she died, she took it with her. That is a kind of victory, I think, not the kind we celebrate. Not the kind that appears in history books with a satisfying resolution, but a victory nonetheless. There is a photograph of Catherine Marsh taken late in her life, around 1928. It was found among her possessions after her death. She is standing in front of a wooden house, wearing a plain dress, her hair gray and pinned back. She is looking slightly away from the camera, not at it. Her expression is unreadable. I have looked at this photograph many times. I have tried to see in her face some trace of what she carried. There is nothing obvious. She looks like any woman in her 50s, alone, tired, unremarkable. But I know what she held inside. I know what she refused to say. And when I look at her face, I see something that might be resolve, or might be sorrow, or might be both. The last document I will cite is a letter written by Catherine Marsh in 1930, 1 year before her death. It was addressed to no one, or perhaps to everyone. It was found in her notebook, undated, unsigned, but unquestionably in her hand. It reads, "I have been asked many times why I will not speak of what happened in the mountains. I have been accused of cowardice, of guilt, of cruelty to the families of the dead. I do not dispute these accusations. Perhaps they are true, but I will say this. There are things that do not survive being spoken. There are truths that, once voiced, destroy more than they reveal. I made a choice to let some things remain in the dark, not because I am afraid of the light, but because I believe the dark is where they belong. If you think this makes me a coward, so be it. If you think this makes me guilty, I accept that judgment. But I will not speak. I will not speak because speaking would be the greater wrong. Let the dead rest. Let the missing stay missing. Let the silence stand. That is all I have to say. And so we are left with this. 4 men died in the mountains in September 1903. 1 woman survived. She returned alone and she refused for 28 years to say why. The silence is the story. The silence is the monument. The silence is all we have, and perhaps all we are meant to have. Catherine Marsh kept her promise. She kept it until the end. And when she died, she took the truth with her. We will never know what happened. And I think that is exactly what she intended.